Hello and welcome everybody, wherever you might be. My name is Peter Jegan and I'm hosting Data Founders, a series of interviews with entrepreneurs and investors who work on data science startups. Today is the interview number 8 and I'm talking to Ahmed Elsamadisi, who is a co-founder and CEO of Narrator. And Narrator builds a managed data system that allows you to have all data in one table. It's a pleasure to have you here, Ahmed.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. So to kick off, can you start from a brief introduction? I know that you've done a lot of interesting things, starting from developing autonomous agents many years ago, and then you worked at data science, etc., etc. Can you guide us quickly through your background, please?
Yeah, so I started my career in robotics. So I did autonomous cars, human-robot interaction, and kind of what a lot of people would consider to be AI today. I moved my way into AI for missile defense, where I was writing algorithms for tracking discrimination for the US government. So this is like, my fun fact is, if a nuclear bomb hits the US, today's current tactical tracking algorithms, 4 of them, I wrote them. So hopefully they worked out well. And then I made my way into the startup world where I actually joined WeWork to build out WeWork's data team. And I built out their data team and data infrastructure. Kind of got to experience the whole WeWork explosion and not the good explosion where we were growing really badly, not the later explosions. And then I left and started Narrator. So that was kind of my overall kind of background from start to Narrator.
Awesome. And I would say it's quite a diverse background. And if you look back on it, what were the most important things that you got through this background, or maybe that you learned that equipped you for a role of the CEO of a data science startup? The most important, maybe.
So when you start and you focus on human-robot interaction, when you're doing robotics, you're really thinking about how do you make the best decision accurately and reliably. So a lot of my early career was in making a decision with making intelligent decisions. So there was a lot of frameworks and important building blocks that I needed to know on how to make the best decision. You'll see how that's very important in Narrator. The second most important thing is how do you build and grow a team? That's something I had to learn with WeWork, which is I was an individual contributor for most of my life, and then I became had to grow teams. What do you motivate, align, inspire your team to move forward? How do you protect your team from all the clashes that are coming at you? So you have to learn how to grow and manage a team. And the third thing is you have to understand how startups kind of work. One of the benefits of being a part of WeWork was I was in touch with the CFO and I was in touch with the CRO, and I got to experience raising money. And that was a really fast growing startup. So there was a lot of things I got to see that are really rare. And I got to use that knowledge when I went to go raise money, when I actually was growing Narrator. And those are the key kind of learnings that I had to do in the growth. And part of being in WeWork was experiencing the problem. We'll talk a lot about the problem that Narrator solves. But the core thing that I think makes a huge difference was that I got to live and breathe the problem. Like, I didn't actually want to be a founder when I didn't think I was going to be an entrepreneur, but I lived and breathed the problem for so long that when I went to go look for a company that was solving the problem that I was seeing, I couldn't find anything. And I was like, okay, well, I have enough friends. Let's go start building this company and let me try to solve it. And I think that's still probably out of all my experience, knowing the problem so intimately and having built and used the current alternatives to solving the core problem, gave me so much. You're going to hear a lot more about it, but it's what keeps you going and it's what keeps you informed. And I think for any founder, seeing how a big company works, how a small company works, how the best case scenario works, and what the worst case scenario is, keeps you level-headed when you're making your own decisions about your company.
Amazing. And let's talk then about the problem. You encountered that problem at WeWork probably, right? Try to find the solution. There were none on the market. So let's talk about that problem. What was it about? And still is probably.
Yeah. So the problem is how we answer ad hoc questions. So when you think about the world of data is built as a pipeline. So you have your raw data, your transformation layer in the middle, and then your BI layer. And in the transformation, we often call it dimensional modeling. which is you build your fact and dimensions and you can put it in a tool to visualize it and slice and dice it. However, companies are changing and they're not actually asking. Everyone thinks they want plots, but they actually want answers to their questions. So you have stakeholders asking a question, and then that question has to go through your 2-week process to dimensionally model it, which is terrible because you have to maintain this new model forever now. And then you have to build a dashboard that has a bunch of stuff that doesn't really fully answer the question, is not very clear, but then the stakeholder has to kind of interpret it. And they're just really fuzzy and really slow. So the problem that we wanted to solve, which is like, why do we need to build all these dimensional models to answer questions? Why can't there be a world where you have a question, answer instantly available? Like you have to answer questions really fast. And I knew why you built this model, but I think the best experience I always try to explain when people ask me like, what was the moment that you were like, aha, this I want to build, like this is the narrator idea. And I always talk about the moment when our chief revenue officer at WeWork was asking me how many people that came to our website called us. And I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go back to my team and we'll get back to you in a couple weeks. He's like, what do you mean? Just like, everyone comes to our site, calls us within 10 minutes. How hard could this be? And I'm like, well, like, so here's the problem. Like in data, you have these different tables and then there's no foreign key that ties a session to a call. And then there's different identifiers, a cookie versus a phone number and blah, 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 blah. And here's all the issues. So that simple question is gonna take 2 weeks of work and then we can answer it. And if you dare ask a follow-up question, that's another 2 weeks of work. And like, I remember myself being so embarrassed trying to explain the reality of data, which I knew was the best case scenario. Like that's every company in the world. But why isn't it so simple? Like, why isn't it just look at every session, look at this person call this, if they call this within 10 minutes, give me the first one, and now I know the conversion rate. And that's kind of what birthed this idea of like, I want to build Narrator because I wanted to solve that problem to make answering questions really easy. And that's how you have to do it. It's the way that stakeholders ask questions. And if you actually study the history, which is like, that's kind of how I learn, I go down the history chain. I noticed that the reason we built dimensional modeling was for dashboards. Like we had a lot of data, we couldn't process it. So we were like, the only way to process a lot of data because storage and compute power is really expensive was to build plots. And we had all these BI tools like Tableau. So we're like, great, how do we build a plot? Well, plots need X and Y axes. So what if we build a table that's designed for X's and Y's, and then we can put it in here and make it work? And when this whole approach was designed and built, the way that we currently do it, it was built in a world where people were like just seeing the data was a very big deal. Like you just wanted to get a dashboard so you had any idea what was going on in your business. This wasn't built to answer questions in minutes. Like if you talk to any data modeling expert, they say 2 weeks to get a data model into production is a great timeline. But you can't wait 2 weeks to answer questions. And that's the problem, is that we built a system to build dashboards while people needed to answer questions. And that's what the fundamental difference you needed to create is. So that's the problem, is there was no system built to answer questions. And there's a reason for it, which is like a little technical reason, which I can dive into maybe toward the end of like, at its core, I'll just say it, is the foreign key, and you can't really join without foreign keys, and foreign keys don't exist. It's like a fundamental low problem. But if you actually look above that and you see the core entity, it's that there's no system built to answer ad hoc questions. And that's what Narrator did.
Interesting. Yeah. And we'll talk about the way how you solve it in a moment. But the very quick question about the transition from being an employee at WeWork to entrepreneurship. Was there a particular moment when you realized that you wanted to build it outside? Because what I hear sometimes from my good friend recently, I heard, he said, okay, let me try to build something cool within a corporation. He works with one of the best tech corporations, and he thinks about his own pet project. So it's a brilliant idea, a big problem. Why not to solve it internally? What you thinking about that?
Yeah. So it's actually really great because it's two parts, right? I actually started building the first prototype of Narrator, like the idea of the activity stream in WeWork. And when I realized that I wanted to actually make this a company, WeWork, the CEO said, build it as a product line. They were like, listen, we'll give you resources, money, teams, build it as a product line within WeWork. And there was two problems that I saw. One problem was, let's say it took me 3, 4, 5 years, like the best case scenario, to build $1 billion company.
Mhm.
At that point, I would be 1% of WeWork.
Mhm.
I don't want to be 1% of a company. Like, that's just disposable. It's not like, that's the first challenge when you work with it, build something within a big company. Second thing, you have a huge bias. You're not building it for your customer. You're building it for WeWork, hoping that it could be used for your customers.
Mhm.
Fundamentally different thing. If I build something for WeWork, I am scoped into the WeWork problem. When I build something for external customers, you are seeing a whole lot of different problems. A lot of our early customers were like from healthcare and like online, offline, and brands and e-commerce and like schools, and it was like all these different. And you have to build a way to answer any question for any of these kind of companies.
Mhm.
That's the stress that you need. And the last thing was really the community.
Mhm.
It is, I don't meet many, like in the founder communities that I talk, and I talk to a lot of founders because we all need each other to stay sane. You got to be like, okay, what's going on with you this week?
Yeah.
You don't really involve yourself in that world when you're in part of a company.
Mhm.
Like you don't, at least I personally have not interacted with like the entrepreneurs building side projects in Netflix.
Mhm.
Like it's really, really, you need a community, you need that level, and you need that commitment, right? If you want to solve a problem and build something, like you're going to be told that it's stupid for like a long time. So you need that feeling and drive to do it. And being in a big company where like you're kind of too comfortable just doesn't, it doesn't get the same.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for providing this framework. I guess it's very interesting angle. First, how significant it is, 1% of the WeWork, or you build a separated company. Then really for whom do you build it? For a customer or for somebody who sells that to a customer? And then the community. I guess it's a very useful framework to think about building an independent company. Because right now I see a lot of, not pressure, but a lot of persuasion comes from corporations who say, stay with us, we have innovation units, we have corporate venture arms, whatever, whatever. I'm not saying that's bad. What I'm saying is that anyone needs to have a kind of a framework in his or her head to decide what setup to choose. So now we see how you made this transition. And if I'm correct, you met your co-founders at WeWork, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually most of my team is from WeWork.
Okay, good, good. So you knew them. That's amazing. Let's talk about the solution, because my understanding was, correct me if I'm wrong, that you really try to change a lot of things at the fundamental, very low layers of the dealing with data, kind of a data schema level, or maybe even deeper. Tell about that, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So the core solution, and we can talk about the core, actually, let's talk about the core innovation and build our way bottoms up. Let's go that way around, actually, if you don't mind.
All right.
So the idea behind Narrator was we wanted to build something that made a difference, not like made you feel like you're making a difference. We wanted to build something, not like, we wanted to change the world in the way that instead of looking at dashboards and like kind of guessing, we wanted to give you a way to answer questions, and we wanted to judge ourselves based on your ability to make the right decision. So to do that, we had to solve a lot of problems down the chain, right? The first thing is you need to data what data is available. We needed to make sure that all your data was available in one place.
Uh-huh.
And that's why we built Narrator on top of Warehouse. We needed all your data to be simple so that you have your mental model of how you think about your business. That instead of having the data change your mental model to match the data, what if the data matched your mental model? So that's why we built a single table, the simplest it could be, 11 columns. So it's not like no JSON blobs, no abstractions, 11 columns, all centered around a customer. So we broke it down to like 3 core entities: customer, time, and action. People ask why customer, time, and action? Because that's how we talk about our business. We're looking to change customer action in time. And therefore, if that data represented that way, you can start asking questions the way you naturally do.
Uh-huh.
The third, that's probably the hardest one, is now that you have this really long table, when I ask my questions, I want to relate behavior in nuanced ways and create why tables I can actually now slice and dice it and plot it. Well, how do I do that? People really consider this activity stream model. If you ask somebody why they won't use it, they'll say it's not queryable. Like it can only answer 5 questions. So how do you get this model to answer any question? That nuance was probably 2 years of work. That's like the core of what took the hardest part, is getting a single table to be able to assemble any possible table you need. And then you have to build the world around it. We talked about this earlier too, which is like the idea that you need to build an ecosystem around it, right? Because answering a question isn't as simple as getting a table. No, I need to get a table. I need to be able to aggregate it and plot it and visualize it and slice and dice it. I need to be able to look at a single customer and see their entire history of everything they've ever done in our company so I can be inspired to ask more questions. I need to be able to ask follow-up questions and make changes and edits and add layers to my data and answer that instantly. And then I need to be able to take that whole thing and use it, whether it's taking a list of people and putting it in a Google Sheet so that me and my team can like fix them, or building a table and putting it in materialized view and putting it in your dashboard, or even sending it back to the product with a webhook so we can make like live, we have a 5-minute recommendation engine. You build the data set quickly, move it into the product. Or you need to tell the story of what your brain is going through to make those decisions and all the questions you're asking in order. That's why we created narratives, this actionable analyses in a story-like format. So you have to build this whole world around this kind of core innovation of the simplicity and the innovation of being able to assemble any table and the ecosystem around it. And when you combine this entire experience together, what you get is this freedom from data team. You and your data team is setting up, you're going to be able to ask questions. You know you're always using the right data. You know, because it's always on top of the raw source of truth. You know there's no way that numbers are going to mismatch because it's literally one table, so everyone's using the same data. You're free to ask questions that bridge all the systems, so all the hard questions about behavior you can use now because of the innovation of bridging sources. You know this can live on past you, whether it's your analysis or your dashboard or your product. You can take this data and use it in more places, and you can continue to build on top of it and explore and explore and explore. And that's kind of the thing that Narrator has done. And it shifts. We talk about what we saw in like what we saw a lot with customers is that because of the way that dashboards are built, people are used to asking questions like, how does gender affect conversion rate? How does like industry affect conversion rate? And what we call this our first order questions, right? You're just like trying to slice it by people. But those industry and gender might be very early indicators, but they're really like kind of the worst indicators you can have. Better indicators is like, how many times did somebody view that how it works page? Like that tells me way more that they're more interested. Looking at behavior tells me a lot more about the customer than looking at their like gender. But looking at behavioral questions is really hard. So nobody's really asking those kind of questions because they take way longer to answer, and the data team hates answering those questions. So a Narrator, by building this ad hoc layer, Narrator frees people to ask all the questions they want to ask, answer them so quickly, and get that natural progression. Like we will see us in meetings going, oh, what about this? We just check for the answer and we go, oh, and then it builds up on a second follow-up question and a follow-up question. And because these follow-up questions are happening in minutes, not weeks, you actually are learning a lot more and kind of iterating. And that's the experience of having an ad hoc layer. And that's kind of the solution that Narrator has created.
It's very interesting. So you build that, let's call it full stack or end-to-end product. And on top of that, we talked with you before, but right, I just felt it right now that you also change a behavior of a user. You teach users to ask questions differently, right? So what I see here is maybe two things that you need to overcome, right? You need firstly, you need to sell this full stack solution, and then you need to persuade people to change the behavior. How do you go around that? It's because typically software kind of uses existing behaviors, right? It goes viral, etc., etc. So in your case, you kind of asks your users to change. How does it work?
Yeah, blood, sweat, and tears. So like, you're 100% right. If we're like building a better something, it's a lot easier, right? Because you're just like, hey, you use Mixpanel, we're a better Mixpanel. You use Looker, we're a better Looker. If you're building something different, you actually don't have to convince people to use your product. You have to convince people to invest in a concept of like an ad hoc questioning layer. And you have to convince people to ask questions in a new way, which is they're like, I know my SQL, I know how to slice and dice data. Like, why would I ask a question in a new way? So there's a lot of roadblocks down that avenue. And especially if you have to sell to like stakeholders who don't even know what you're talking about. So the thing that we know is the thing that keeps us kind of able to do that is the fact that we understand the problem. Like we know the problem that data people are facing. Data people and people who use data are very well aware of why these questions are really hard and why this is such an exhausting process. And they know the problem in and out. So what we try to do is resonate with those people and say, like, just give us your time of day to show you that what we are doing helps solve this problem. And by knowing that problem so intimately, it helps us really resonate with those people. And then the second problem, those people, especially with Narrator, single table, answer any question, they go, bullshit. So they're like, I get this will solve a lot of my problems, but I don't believe that you will do it. And what we spend a lot of time in is demoing, really giving people like, I give a demo and any one of the viewers can go online and book it. And part of the demo is I'll ask you to ask me any question in the world and let's see if I can answer it live. If I can't answer it live, then you win. I've been doing this now for 2 years in demoing this exact way and hasn't been stumped yet. So challenge accepted for everyone.
Awesome.
So giving people that experience to like see like how any possible question can be answered using the narrator approach is huge. Making it free to start. Like Narrator, when it first started, we were a consultancy, and we'll talk a little about kind of that. We were $10,000 a month. Now it's free to start, and the price starts at $200 a month. Like that gives people a lot more, like giving people the ability to kind of get involved, and then the kind of demoing it, and then really just trying to bridge the gap. Like I was on the other side. I was a data person having a data team, and all these companies were selling me like, oh, we're gonna solve all your problems. And it was all just bullshit marketing. And when people realize that Narrator is not just bullshit marketing, but it's an actual innovation and something different, people give you time of day. And that's how you actually get to change the minds of people and really start changing that behavior. And those are the people who experience it, love it, they tell their friends, and you kind of have to go that way. So it's really just building that one at a time, powering through it to try to get everyone to change. And I don't know, the customers who experience it really are excited. So it keeps you going to like find the next one.
Cool. Two important things as I've heard from you. So domain expertise and deep understanding of what you're actually doing. And then a lot of demos, a lot of talks with customers, a lot of persuasion. I would suggest to make a step back. So there is another important bunch of people whom you need to persuade. It's investors. And they come typically earlier than customers. So I assume with that idea, you was rejected not once, right? So I'm curious about two things. First, what was your approach to pitch quite a complex and innovative thing? And second, what did keep you going? Was it some customer development? Was it some customers who gave you interesting answers? Because when you hear a lot of no from investors, what did keep you going?
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of no's in my life. I've been laughed out of a room. I remember one person said, if you solve this problem, then you must be your company will be worth $1 billion. There's no way you solved it. So like leave. And I was like, what? But I can show you my theoretical solution. They're like, funny, leave. Like this, you don't have anything. And it's really hard when you're building something different. Like you don't get traction. Like you have to spend 2 years innovating and building it to get it to actually work. And then you can actually start selling, but it's still like, there's a lot of product and stuff to build. So I think daily I was hearing somebody telling me to change my product, change the idea. Even my team was like, at one point losing hope and going like, let's build something different. So really bringing it all together is very important. So the two things that we'll talk about right now is like you said, how do you kind of stay motivated and how do you pitch investors?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of the same to me. The way you inspire your team and the way you inspire your investor and the way you inspire your customer is all kind of the same. And the first one is, like you said, right? It's having a deep understanding of the problem. Like every time when I tell the story of Narrator, I talk about the world that exists today and why it needs to change, why people can't answer questions that they need. Like at one point we once had an executive come to us and tell us like, hey, we need data to answer like help with bonuses. And we're like trying to answer data, and like because the way that data works and like the nature and being able, and we had a really intense time crunch, like building fact dimension modeling caused issues and bugs and things happened. And it ended up going with wrong bonuses being given out to every single person. Like if you're doing like value like based on your performance and your ability to use data is like trying to maintain a huge system, it just doesn't work. So I know the impact. I've seen people get fired with bad data. I've seen companies like lose their mind because they saw a plot and they were like, month over month, we're down 50%. And like the whole company explodes. Like, so having that problem be constantly like lingering over me as the thing that I want to change, the thing that I know that when those things happen, the data team, like myself, hated our lives. We would be yelled at, things like this. I knew the person I wanted to impact, and I knew that the problem that I wanted to solve. So reminding everyone, whether it's your investor or customer, of that person that you're fighting for is key. The second thing that kept us going was having another data person. So we'll talk a little bit also, is like data people are so important to Narrator. And the data team like really kept us, and we're only two people, it was me and Brittany. And we would look at each other and be like constantly reminding each other of, do you remember when we had to do this without Narrator? This would have been a whole month. And like now it's here. Like literally we would talk about like, if this doesn't exist, how would we go back to like going back? It's like being in a Tesla and then having to go back ride a horse. It's like, what are you talking about? I can't go do that. So painting that picture of that efficiency and that experience is huge for our customers and for our investors. I used to always demo for investors. I would say, ask me any question before we even had a product. I would say, ask me any question and I can show you how theoretically I can answer it with Narrator really quickly. Or I would, when we raised our Series A, I had like the investors sit next to me as I was like, ask me live and let me show you the experience as a data person and as a data team, what I would have to have done and what I can do now. And the last thing, which I think is the biggest thing that you do, and this is something I learned from WeWork, which is like, we have to have a very clear image of the world you want to create. The first pitch deck I ever made for Narrator was about two parts. It was about building a standardized layer where all data can be standardized in a single table. And it was called the Universal Data Model. And later on, it became, now we call it the Activity Stream. And it became about kind of allowing people imagining a library or catalog of questions. And you can say, because of standardization, you can share and reuse. So you can imagine like, what is my CAC? And you can run that entire analysis that tells a story so someone can know, how do you think about CAC and how do you answer it using that company's data? And why is that vision so important? The world today, if you think about like front end, all the software we use, there's so much open source in front end software. Okay. In terms of algorithms, there's so much open source algorithms, but answering questions with data, there's no open source analyses because the input is so different that you can't really build an analysis to be used. So there's people who have built the same analysis for 30 companies as they moved over. And today I bet there's another 100 people answering the question of what attribution model should I use? So by standardizing data, you can actually share and build this library of analyses. And that was always the vision. I would always tell them, imagine if you're a Series A company and on day one, you can set up Narrator in one day and you have access to 1,000 questions, questions you want to answer, questions you didn't even know you wanted. And whenever you had a new question, you were able to answer that new question instantly by yourself. And if you thought through and built an analysis, you can share that with the rest of the world. Continually growing as a community together, getting better and better and better. That vision is the vision of Narrator. And that vision actually just became possible. We just released templates 2 weeks ago. We have 5 templates now for like CAC, attribution, and things. And we have a plan to build another 100. And now it's possible to actually like go into Narrator. Ooh, I want my CAC. Click, run, and get that on top of your data. So those 3 things, really experiencing the problem. So always reminding who you're fighting for. Having a team that you can actually bounce ideas and stay motivated. And having that vision of the world that you want to create, you can paint that picture really, really well. And the right investor, the right customer, and the right team, and the right like partner or employee or person to join your team will value those 3. And that's the people you want to be in your like circle.
Amazing, yeah. And if you allow, I would like to maybe push you push you here a bit. What you described are wonderful ways to keep someone going, but I would say they're quite internalized. So you have this vision, right? You stick to this vision. Or you talk with your teammate and you reinforce each other. What I'm curious, would it be helpful, or maybe was it helpful for you to look at some external data? Let's say you talked with the customer, you did some maybe research, or you get some numbers, that kind of evidences, or they really did not matter much, at least for you?
Yeah, so we avoided that for a bunch of reasons. So, like, we're doing something different. So, like, what is the total addressable market? Like, I don't know, $1 trillion. It's all of data. Like, I don't know. It's you talk about like, oh, like the CDPs are growing and they're like $1 billion industry and like people are needing a solution. Like that's if you're building something a little better and you're saying like a lot of pitches are like Looker got bought for $3 billion by Google. We are building the next generation of Looker. We believe we can be that big also. That's not what Narrator is. I used to tell my investors that, and this is something that I highly don't recommend unless you know what you're doing here, but I would tell my investors that they're not going to make money off Narrator. I told every investor, I said, Narrator is not for you. Narrator is for your kids. Like, the thing that I want to change is how every single person in the world makes a decision. It's going to be a long journey, and I'm stubborn, and I'm going to go fight for that journey. So chances are you're going to die before we reach our goal to building something so impactful for everyone. And that's why you have to be willing to come on the journey with us for your kids, for the next generation. Like I benefit from Narrator because I like use it and love it. But the real impact is in like 5, 6 years and 10, 20 years when no one is thinking about data modeling to answer questions. Like when people like that doesn't exist in their head. It's like there's like when you watch videos online, you don't think about like the JavaScript plugin that you have to install every time you would try to watch the video. Like that's been solved. So that's the world that I want to create. And I find that it's really hard. It's already hard enough to explain what you're trying to do because the person doesn't understand the problem. Like your investor is like, I don't get it. Doesn't Looker help you find insights? And you're like, no, they're a dashboarding tool. And they're like, well, why don't you just use Watson? IBM Watson promises to solve. And you're like, no, it's just kind of marketing bullshit. And you're like, so you can't really use, it's really weird because we're a data company and I'm saying you can't really use data when you're doing something new and different. The error and the bounds are really high. So you really got to just trust people that feel your passion, understand what you're trying to do, and trust that you're the right person to go for that journey. And I think that's the people who followed us. That's the people who joined us.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting approach for really something something new, and also interesting to me to understand, to listeners, I'm sure, to understand how someone can do customer development with a very new product. Because my understanding is that when you build something really new, you are the one who tells customers what they need, because they might really don't know that they need it. So how did you find the balance between, on the one hand, you need to really listen to these guys and understand what they really want, and at the same time, you had and still have this vision. So how did you balance that out in the early customer development process?
Yeah. So Narrator has done a couple of things that are very unique. Narrator doesn't have any product people, no product managers, no product people, and no designers. And we operated initially as a consultancy. So how do you build a product that solves this core problem? Well, one, you really battle test it yourself. So we operated as a consultancy where I was supporting 8 companies, and the rule was they can ask me unlimited questions over Slack. I don't know if you know what it's like to have 8 companies bombarding you with questions. But for you to be able to answer 8 questions like instantly, you need to make sure your product handles all the little edge cases, all the problems. We used to call it death by 1,000 cuts. We don't want that. We don't want a bunch of features that are just like extra. We want to make sure that there's 0 cuts as you're going through the core process. So we iterated for a whole year. We were answering questions and really trying to answer questions in less than 10 minutes. And that's kind of how we iterated the product. And so we like lived and breathed it. And that's kind of when we tell customers what the experience is like, we're speaking out of our own experience. We're like, okay, this is the questions you're getting. Second thing we did was when we started building the product, the way that we control like kind of what gets built and how do we iterate is all by data. So like data is the one doing customer support. So if you submit a ticket today, me or Brittany will be the ones who pick up the ticket and talk to you about it. We understand your problem. We're using the product every single day. And we're saying, here are the things that we need to do to make the experience a bit better. So our customers do submit a lot of recommendations and say like, oh, this is really kind of annoying. And we take that. But because it's all filtered through data, we understand so deeply what the customer is experiencing. We know what they're trying to do. We know what the right answer that we're trying to get them to do is. And we know what they know. And we can slowly build things in a way to guide them in that direction. So by being such an ingrained core customer and being so intimate with all the customers and having battle tested in like the worst conditions, we're actually able to make decisions that all move the product forward. Every data person who uses our product will tell you that all the little things are thought about, like down to the naming of how we auto name columns, like down to how you swap and add and build. The fact that you can have multiple aggregations on the same parent data set are all things that if you work in data, are all the frustrations that we have now solved by iterating on it. The fact that you sometimes want to just right click and say, give me everything this customer did and see their story without leaving your page. The fact that you want a Jupyter notebook-like, but high quality presentations. All these little things that you will experience when you go use the product is because data people have been ingrained in it, and we ensured that we weren't building a product without direction. We weren't like, tell me what you want, we'll build it. We were like, we're going to build a product that solves the problem. And the problem, like you remember, wasn't visualization, wasn't data. It was better decisions. So like if for any reason a customer made the wrong decision because they misread the plot, that's narrator's fault. Plot should not be able to be misread. You have to so we need to make sure that that's solved. And that's kind of how you build stuff for a customer. So it ends up not being a bunch of like extraneous features. Like Narrator doesn't have a trillion shiny little gadgets that do really nothing. We have a core tool to be able to ask and answer questions, and we built that super well. And data people will know that difference.
It's a very striking example, not very frequent, unfortunately, when you really transitioned successfully from a consultancy to a product company, right? What I would be curious about is, do you think that this approach will work for any type of product, or that was a particular type of product, let's call it data science product, right? That allowed you to transition from a consultancy to a product company. Do you think it would work, let's say, if you are building, let's say, I don't know, customer service automation tool or something like that? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the challenge between the transition between consulting to product is, it really depends on how you were consulting. So let's say, like, for example, for us, we had a bunch of rules while we were consulting. Like, if you're consulting, you're trying to solve a problem for our customer, but we had rules that we set very core. You could not use anything outside of data model, and you could not use anything outside of narrator. Okay, so we were really not we were really using our internal product for the customer. Very different. It's very easy when you're building like an automation tool to have a bunch of edge cases, write some custom code, build some custom things, change it, have these little snippets you build in for the customer. And what ends up happening is you have this thing that works for some customers, but it's like now clunky, it has a lot of extra things in it. And now it's, when you go to sell it as a product, people are like, I can't use this. Like, it was so hard for us when we were doing like a lot of our early, like some of our consulting were like e-commerce and marketing. And people were like, oh, why don't you just like build the, like make it more marketing toward? And we had rules that was like, no, we cannot do that. Like the goal of Narrator is to be able to answer any question. We can't build anything custom for any company, for any industry, which is really rare. Like when you think about all the consultings, they usually are vertical specific, industry specific. And we're like, no. The ability to answer any question. So that's kind of the core thing is if you're starting, and I tell this to any company that's starting as a consulting, starting as a consulting is really good to get customer data. It's really good to experience the problem. It's really good to make battle test your product and make some revenue. But you're not a consultant. You're using consulting to learn. Big difference. So if you're using consulting to learn, don't forget you have a product and your product has rules and guidelines that you need to maintain. If you're just a consultant, then you can do whatever you want, and that's really, really bad. Because then you're gonna, when you go to a product, it's not gonna fit. You're gonna be like, oh wait, this doesn't actually work, because your customer is not gonna be able to do all the hacks that you have to do it. So it needs to be built in. It needs to be seamless, and it's really, really tricky. So I would say anyone who's going to do consulting, make sure you're using consulting to help inform your product, not being a consultant.
Yes, thank you for that. It was a very great spin about turn to discuss a consultancy, because lots of data scientists really do consulting and then try to switch to a product. That's something that I see quite frequently. And just to be cautious of your time, maybe a last bit. We've discussed quite a lot today. Is there any theme or topic or question that we didn't cover but you believe deserves to be covered and discussed maybe?
Yeah, I think this is the last thing that I think is super important is the concept of a community. So one of the sad and happy things about the community of data is that we're very scarred. Like when you are building a company, you need to get your first people to give you a shot. And you're not competing against, like in data, you're not competing against like a random archaic industry that uses paper. You're competing against Google, Amazon, and a lot of leading companies, like throwing billions of dollars at the problem and having huge engineering teams. And when you're a tiny little startup like us, 7 people trying to go against these huge behemoths telling you what to do, the only thing you actually can rely on is, like we said, blood, sweat, and tears, but you hope that the community is willing to give you a shot. And that's really, really hard, right? Because I know being a data person, you're inundated with a bunch of bullshit products trying to like take your money. And it's really, really hard to be something different and stick out and try to get people to believe you and listen to you. Like this is like when we started, it's a tricky business, right? Because everyone is so used to like there's 1,000 tools to help you plot data, like literally 1,000 tools. And everyone's like, oh, we'll help you find insights. And you're like, no, you just visualize data. You don't help me find insights. And to try to get people to like say, like, we'll help you answer ad hoc questions, the data community needs to be a little bit tighter. The front end community is so much better at that. So when we talk about like software engineers, they are so much more willing to try new tools. They're so much more willing to be like, oh, this is a new company. They look at the founder. This person understands the problem. Let's try their product. We use like a graph database from a company that experienced it. We use like our logging from Honeycomb. Like we have a lot of tools that we have added to our system because we found people that like the community of software engineers were like, oh, this person knows what's up. Like, let's try their product. And they just try it. Data is not like that. Data is very anti-trying. They're a lot more slow moving. And because of the way that the data community is, we've made it really hard for companies to innovate. As a company innovating, like coming into the data is really tricky because everyone's like, I already paid $1 million for Looker and Tableau and I have all these tools. I don't want to change. And you're like, but you're like not happy. And they're like, yeah, I know, but like there's no other way to do it. And I'm like, give me a chance. And they're like, oh, I've heard that 1 million times. I don't want to talk to you. And for us, it's like getting that first demo to like change someone's mind is so important, right? Before a demo, it's all words that you kind of like are mismapping. So I think that's the topic that I would love to, well, that's the change I would love to see. And I always talk about this in anywhere I go because there are like-minded data people who want to build that data community where we're able to support each other and allow something to really help. But there is a lot of noise in data and it makes it really hard to give people a shot. So I'm sure there's some brilliant people out there trying to figure out how do you find the right signal between all this noise and enable a data community where people are willing to give each other a chance. I think that would be like a huge thing for all of us in the data community trying to fight this battle.
Yeah, and I guess it will be better over time as the community mature on the one hand, firstly, purely based on the kind of maturity of the community. And then I'm sure there are people who try to innovate. So people like you also will make the community more responsive. The more you innovate, I guess, the more response you get at certain point. So I'm sure we will hear a lot of interesting news from you and from Narrator. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for talking with us today. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time as well. It was really fun.